Stay tuned. The show is about to begin.
What's going on? What's going on? YouTube Live, Fireside. It's your boy C-Roc here on the What Are You Made Of show. I got my guest in the house, Jeffrey Shaw. Jeffrey, you just got to hit that camera button at the bottom of your screen. It should be somewhere. That'll turn on your video so we can kick this party off right.
All right. I'm not seeing. Can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hold on. Let me invite you. Let me hit maybe a little notification.
I'm not seeing a video option yet.
All right, I just sent you. You should have got a notification that came across.
There we go. Awesome.
There he is. What's happening, man?
Hey, how are you? Nice to meet you.
You too. That shirt's awesome. Look at that thing.
Well, thank you.
I like it.
I appreciate that. I put some thought into meeting you.
Look, thank you for coming on the show today. We're live on YouTube. We're live here on Fireside. The replays will be up as well. However, this show is all about the ingredients that have gone into making my guests who they are. It's called What Are You Made Of? And we really want to highlight the things that you've been through to get to where you are today, right? And to be doing what you're doing. The successes we'll talk about, of course. But really want to make sure that we're inspiring people to show them they're not alone when they go through tough times, discouragements, failing businesses, failing relationships, tough times. And so we've done this now, I think, over 600 times with great guests, and I just want to add you to the mix.
Awesome. Honored.
So let me introduce you, and then I'm going to start the show with this question. What are you made of? Jeffrey Shaw is in the building. He's often described as an authority and advocate for self-employed business owners. I am one. Valued for his actionable and in-the-trenches approach to achieving business and life success. Why shouldn't he be? How many people could say they've never worked for anyone else? Let's do it, man. What are you made of, Jeff?
What I love about this question is that, I think it's like something we think we should know about ourselves, but until somebody asks you, you don't want to think about it. We don't, because we're just out there doing stuff. So what am I made of? I would say persistence, because I seem to always be the last person. I'm never the first one out of the gate. I always seem to be the last one standing. So I'll say persistence and personal development, because the whole thing about being out in the world to me in any big way it is like personal development on steroids. Like the more you expose yourself, the more you're faced with the good, the ugly, the challenges. So I have just found, my 40-year journey of self-employment, that it's been like personal development on steroids, and I'm grateful for that.
Let me ask you a question about personal development. I just thought of this as you're saying this. Do you think we really need a whole lot of personal development if we didn't have all the environmental factors around us that we experience when we're going on search of a goal, on the movement in living our lives, the journeys that we live, with all of the suppressing factors and discouragements and insecurities of other people? Is that really why we need the personal development more than just to be learning something new?
Yeah. I think it's inevitable. I think it's the human journey. I think we are by nature seekers. In an ideal scenario, maybe we wouldn't have to uncover the stuff that covers up the best of ourselves, but it happens so quick. Very early in life, there's going to be some suppression of our personalities, I think. Not intentional, but just in a very short period of time. We may be born pure, we may be born at our best, but in a very short period of time, let's face it, science has shown even just not bonding with a mother's breast right at birth has an effect on that child, right? So instantaneously upon birth and every moment after that, there's some level of suppression, whether it's parental guidance or society. So then it becomes a personal development journey to uncover that, right? How do we get back to finding our authentic selves, our boldest selves? I said, I think it's inevitable in the journey that we need personal development. And at my core of everything that I teach as a business coach, my core principle is that your level of success is proportionate to your level of personal development. I think one of the key problems in people trying to find more success, more of whatever they want in life, is they're trying to overstuff the sack. You know, I mean, if you just try to do more, but you haven't actually, if you try to take more action in your business, but you don't actually believe you deserve more, it's not going anywhere. Right. So to me, it has to begin with personal development, that you've really stepped into believing you deserve more in life so that you can put more effort in. More effort leads to more rewards, and there's more capacity in your life for the rewards because you've believed that you deserve more. So to me, it always comes back to personal development.
Yeah, and you know what I found, and I love to hear your thoughts. Like for me, personal development is been something where I've just realized and found out
Hmm.
who I am, and what my goals and purposes are, not other people's. To really clearly identify the fact or identify the goals that I want for my life, the design I want for my life, not my mom, not my dad, my friends, associates, their opinions, the news, the media, all of that infiltration of information and data. For me, that's what it's been. Has that been the same for you and what you found in personal development?
Well, you know, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges today, and in part because of social media, right? It just, you need a filter of discernment, a stronger filter of discernment today, because there's so many options. Whether it's how much we see on social media, you know, your peers doing better, or so it appears, and your competition. So we have so much more information there. You go to conferences and you go to educational formats, you take trainings. Some is good and some isn't so good. It's one of the hardest things. You know, it's interesting because I'm going in through this process right now of rebranding myself as a speaker, because I was just kind of getting on the ramp as a professional speaker prior to COVID. And of course, COVID shut that down. And I've taken a few years because I developed my self-employed business institute, and I've had other really good things going well. So I've kind of taken my time to reposition myself and get back out there as a speaker. But now that I'm doing it, the hardest thing has been to seek out advice of people, trusted resources, and yet not let the advice over influence my style, my voice, my authenticity. It's one of the hardest things I think in business, because we have so much exposure, and we're the type of, if to be successful, you're the type of person that seeks out information, but at the same time, you have to really hold tight to, like, what is your vision? What is your authentic self? And I think in a lot of industries, speaking being one of them, but I think it's true in a lot of industries, there's such a way of doing things that so many people, oh no, you have to, your one sheet has to look like this. Your website has to have this format. But then you end up looking like everybody else. So it's like, get the information and then you have to put your own twist on it to figure out your own voice. It's hard because we have more exposure.
Yeah, I agree, man. And you know, anytime I'm in consulting someone, and we do a lot of consulting for speakers and those that are going on podcasts at that one agency, I want people to be themselves. And I encourage them to be themselves. Be you. If you're cool, be cool. Whatever cool means. If you're weird, be weird. The weirder you are, the better, as far as I'm concerned, because you stand out, right? But lean into that and extrovert with whatever that is. That's my advice to people. And I love that you said that. I'm in full alignment with that. You know, I got to also ask you, you know, first of all, how the hell did you not work for anyone ever?
I know. I didn't realize that was weird until a few years ago. I was at a dinner party and the conversation came up, and I mentioned I had never worked for anybody. I've never had a paycheck. And they were all like, "What? Do you talk about that on stage?" I'm like, I didn't think it was odd. I just, you know, my first job, if you will, my first business was I sold eggs door to door, because I grew up in the country and, you know, there were chickens around. So I sold eggs door to door. They weren't my own chickens. I struck a deal with a local farmer to buy his eggs for 25 cents a dozen, and then I sold them for $1.25 a dozen. So I made $1 a dozen profit, and I went door to door selling eggs. I think I was 14. I think at a really early age, to be honest with you, Mike, I grew up, like I said, in this remote country town. I had parents. I had two older brothers, and there's a 4 to 5 year gap between me and my brothers. And I think my parents forgot I still lived at home by the time I was 14. And I was a very independent. I was the easy kid, right? I was well behaved, didn't get in trouble. So I think they forgot I was still there. So they were off doing their own thing. And I just real quickly got a message like, man, this life thing is up to me. Like, nobody's coming to save me. You know, I'm not even sure my parents were interested in saving me. Like, no one's coming here. Like, I see no prospect for higher education, great job opportunities. So to me, it was just like, take life by its balls and figure it out. And that's why I never worked for anybody. I just at a really early age just figured out this life thing is up to us. No one's coming to save you. Nobody's coming to hear your complaints and your whining, and just figure it out. So I never occurred to me to get a job. And I
So
just, so from that, by 20, I went off to photography school. The one natural talent that I'd say natural, but obviously you have to foster now natural talent. But I seem to have a natural talent as a photographer. So I decided to pursue that, having no idea how do you turn that into a career. I had no idea. But let me go to photography school. And that was 20. By 21, I graduated from that photography school and struggled for a few years, and within a few years became literally the go-to family portrait photographer for affluent families. I worked with the wealthiest of the wealthy of the United States, and I've done that for 40 years. And over the past 10 years, I've started business coaching, writing books, all the things I do today. But it just along the way, it just never occurred to me to work for anybody. I just I'm going to do it myself.
and in starting that photography business, what is a memory that you have of one of the toughest lessons you had to learn in entrepreneurship when you first started out? Besides the one, which is a really good one when you're younger, like nobody's coming to save me, even my parents. But what's another one like really sticks out to you where like you started getting into business, started making money? Because I mean, the reason I'm saying this, I've had moments in my life where I found out things that I didn't know. And at first when I found out about it, it cost me money. And I'm like, shit, I didn't know that. That's not my fault. And I had this low level of responsibility for about 5 minutes, right? And then I start to be like, well, I should know that. And if I don't know that, that lesson costs money to learn. So what's
Easily. This is a great question, an easy answer for me. So as I mentioned, when I finished photography school, I struggled for about 3 years, and I struggled because I went back to my hometown. So here I was starting out as a portrait photographer, and I had such grand ideas. I was going to build a massive business, and it was going to be high end, but whatever that standard meant. But here I am trying to build this high end photography business in a town that's lower middle class at best. And it wasn't flying. I struggled for 3 years. And then I actually had a conversation with someone who I thought I could hopefully get them as a client. And after I made my best pitch as a photographer and all the reasons why she should hire me, she said, well, that sounds great and all, but I don't have the luxury of worrying about my children's memories. I don't know how I'm paying my rent this month. And I sat back in my chair, Mike, and I realized a fundamental business lesson that everybody needs to learn, and it holds true today. I sat there and thought, I have a choice. I can either bend my values, bend everything I believe in to fit this market, or I could believe, as I do, that there's a market out there somewhere that values what I already do and who I am. And I chose the latter. And I thought about it, like, well, then what market out there in the world feels aligned with my values, would appreciate what I had to offer? And I realized it has to be an affluent market, and not because I think the roads are paved with gold, because they're not. I've been serving the affluent market for 40 years. That's not what it's about. What I realized is that I was selling photography and memories and handing down portraits from generations, and the importance of families preserving moments. The only people that can appreciate that are people that have discretionary income to invest in the future. If you're struggling to get by month to month, that is not your value. It's not your priority. So I realized what I needed was people with discretionary income, affluent people. The problem was with where I came from, I didn't know what that meant. Affluent, to me in the early 80s, affluent meant, man, if you're making six figures, right? That's affluence. Of course, my world opened up to realize, man, there are people making millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? So I opened up to a world that I'm now photographing 25,000, 30,000 square foot houses. I mean, it was such a stretch where I came from, but I was always comfortable with it. I always had the most marvelous, fantastic, loving people to work with. But that was the pivotal moment for me. Do I want to change who I am and be inauthentic to myself and my values to fit the market to make a buck? Or do I want to believe in my heart that there's somebody out there, there's a market out there that values me for who I am today and what I have to offer? And I chose that route, and I would encourage everybody to take that route, because there is a market out there for everything and everybody if you're patient and you do the work to find them. But as I said, businesses waste way too much time trying to get people to value them. Your number one job is to find the people who already value what you do. And then life is easy.
Yeah, that's really identifying your prospect, your avatar, right? And then figuring out where those people hang out.
Yeah. And
Right?
to me, it's value driven. I mean, it really, like I said, here I was, this kid from a poor country town, ended up working with the wealthiest people in the country. We couldn't have been more different, but our values were so similar. Like I've had life insurance since I was 19 years old. It's just something that made sense to me. My father died at 52 when I was 20, didn't have life insurance. My brother died at 59, leaving two kids in a lurch, didn't have life insurance because I came from a family who stayed in the struggle. Financially, mentally, they stayed in the struggle. They never looked past their nose, right? But that wasn't me. For whatever reason, I came into this world thinking that's insane. Like we got to be our actions today. We have to think about how that's impacting the next 7 generations. We have to think about in our own lives, how do we plan for the future? So I just had different wiring from the family I was in. So I had to find the people that had similar values. So to me, finding that market that you're aligned with isn't whether you come from the same world. It's not whether you just want to target that market. It really is about values. And I connected with the affluent market, the luxury market, because oddly enough, I shared their values and we got each other. They knew that I understood them and what they valued.
And so, Jeffrey, question on the photography business, because it's a good business to be in, and then there's a lot of need for it out there. But how did you scale it, or did you scale it because of the fact that you are the photographer a lot of times, and people want you as the photographer? Like, how do you scale that?
I love it. Yeah, somebody just yesterday asked me if they needed help, they needed a favor. So they asked me how experienced I was in Photoshop. And I said, not at all. Like I've been a photographer for 40 years. Like I don't make my money behind a computer. I make my money behind the camera. So how I scaled it was I had a team at any given time of 4 to 5 people around me, but I stuck to what I was great at. And that's actually my core principle as a business coach, because the problem with people in business is without it being pointed out, they go into business, they fall into what I call the rule of thirds trap. They spend a third of their time running their business, a third of the time marketing to get the business, and a third or less doing what they're actually great at. So once I woke up to that, I'm like, okay, that doesn't work. What I did, I spent 80% of my time working, doing exactly what I was great at, shooting, being behind the camera. I did 2 things. I only had 2 roles in my life. I shot photographs and I did the sales because my clients wanted to work with me. I didn't do the framing. I didn't do the retouching. I didn't do anything running the business. I just showed up. I had the easiest job in the world. And I worked the least number of hours on my employees. I showed up. I did sessions for 2 hours. 2 hours a shoot. I did 2 or 3 a day. I did 150 shoots a year, very carefully calculated. I did the sessions and I did the sales. That was it. And it was seasonal. I was in the Northeast, Northeast photographing on location. So I also only worked May through December. I took January through April off because the weather sucked. So it was very controlled. And that's how I scaled it, was not by scaling in volume or staff, but I scaled it by honing in on only doing what I was great at. And that gave me the room and capacity to do the maximum volume at the maximum dollar amount.
Yeah, and a lot of people think like, well, what about the things I like to do? The thing is, people don't realize what you're good at is generally what you like. And most of the time you don't like something, it's because you're not good at it. So they go hand in hand, which is awesome. So yeah, I love it. So, okay. So then you had the photography business. Did you go outside of that business and open up other businesses as well prior to coaching, or did you stick in that business and then go into?
I stayed in that 100% until I think I received my coach training, I think in 2008. And it was, I certainly, because of the clientele I worked with, I have to say I had a little legs up that the recession was coming. Just by nature of them being primarily Wall Street folks, like I saw their buying pattern change, and I had been in business long enough to know. For example, so a little tip with the affluent market, they always pay with credit cards, right? Because they've got the highest level credit cards with great bonuses. The moment they switch to paying with a check, something's coming, right? So because they're being more calculated about how their money is being spent. So I saw a couple buying patterns change, and I'm like, okay, something's coming. So I think I might have some extra time on my hands. So I took up coaching, which I had a coach for 7 years prior to that. He retired. So I loved receiving coaching as a gift, and I wanted to give that gift. I thought it was just going to be a side gig, but I fell in love with helping other people. So it took me a number of years, I'd say from 2008 to 2015. It took me about 7 years to just kind of work on coaching as a side hustle. But by 2015, I was kind of all in. So that's when I really started pulling back on how much photography I did, and started doing very little. So by 2016, 2017, I was doing so little photography, it was almost not worth counting, and really focusing on coaching, other businesses. Started one-to-one coaching. 2018, I released my first book, Lingo. That broadened my world into many of other opportunities. My second book, The Self-Employed Life, came out in 2021. I started my podcast in 2014, still going 9 years later. So yeah, not really any other businesses of my own. Kind of went from photography into a full coaching business. But I've been helping other people in every industry imaginable build their own business.
And so with that switch to coaching, because everybody starts generally in coaching when they do that as not accepting money. A lot of times they go out and help people, they consult people. A lot of coaches out there have problems and they never turn it into a business. Yeah. How did you transfer from getting started, I want to coach, I want to help people, to accepting your first dollar and then creating an offer that you could replicate and then eventually scale that? Because so many people don't get over that hurdle.
Yeah, no, and it took me a little bit before, and it was harder than I thought. In this, so as a coach today, I work with a lot of people leaving corporate to become self-employed, and that journey of change is so much more difficult than we think, right? I mean, I've had plenty of C-suite executives I've helped, or high-level executives, become self-employed, and they're shocked. They're like, I was running a major corporation. I'm a brilliant. One time, one of my clients was a NASA scientist. She's like, I'm a NASA scientist. Like, how is this hard, running your own business? I'm like, yeah, it's very different than the world you were in. So I actually, even at that point, I was 25 years in business as a photographer, and I found it shockingly challenging to build a coaching practice. It was a very different thing. What made the difference for me, and will make the difference for any coaches, consultants today, I think, is really getting in your head that you're in a transformation business, right? So you're in the business of convincing other people that they want to transform their business or their life. The biggest hang up, by far the biggest hang up that people have in investing in you. Now, when you're a coach or a consultant and you're marketing yourself, we tend to think we have to get people to know, like, and trust us because that's what we've been told. It's actually not the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle in a transformation business is people believing in themselves that they're going to do what they need to do to get the change, right? They're not doubting you, they're doubting themselves. Okay. Which is why, by the way, my next book, my third book, is about self-doubt. I'm tackling this issue, but that's the biggest hurdle of transformation is people, especially today, everybody has worked with somebody, everybody's hired a coach, everybody's taken a training program, everybody's joined something that they did not succeed in. They tend to blame the facilitator. It may have been, but it's often not the facilitator. It's the fact that they didn't find in themselves what they needed to find in order to make the change they want. Right. So I call my clients and the students of my business institute, I call them to the mat right in the beginning. And it's one of the first questions I make them ask themselves. If you don't get the results you want from this program, what are the reasons why? I want you to look at yourself, because at the end of the day, it's your burden of responsibility. Even if you don't like what I'm offering you, it's your responsibility to say, hey, you know what? You're not living up to the promise you made to me. Right. And get what you want out of it. And I insist anybody I work with walks away getting what they came to get. Because so when you're in one of the ways that you can get over that hurdle of charging what you're worth as a coach is to understand that their biggest obstacle is themselves, and you getting them over that has immeasurable value, because that's what changes the rest of their life. If they conduct themselves the rest of their life in a similar way, you can't even put a price tag on what you've just done with them. So you've got to charge, and also you have to charge as a coaching consultant, you have to charge what scares you and scares your client. If it's not scaring you, then you're going to slide. You're not going to show up 120%. You might show up 100%, but you have to charge to a degree that you're uncomfortable with what people are paying you. So you're like, oh man, I have to crank it out because I'm not even comfortable with what I'm charging. That to me is when you know you're pricing right.
You hit the nail on the head with all of that, by the way. So, I mean, not that you need validation from me, but you're right on point.
It's always nice to hear.
Yeah, because a lot of coaches and consultants start taking it personal and thinking it's about them, that they failed and this and that. When I've worked with people, they give up on themselves and they just don't have that self-belief, and or they've tried something in the past, they paid somebody in the past, and then they failed for whatever reason. Most of the time, it's their own self-doubt, and what happens is they make a decision after that coaching doesn't work.
Correct.
And then they're living off of that decision, and all they need to do is make a new decision right after that, somewhere down the road. They don't have to even change this. They just have to make a decision that says, coaching works. I got to do the work. I got to put the work in. I got to get after it no matter what it takes. So, yeah, I think we've all experienced that. Now, setting a price, you talked about it's got to scare you, but how did you start charging, and what was your like process for coming up with a fee?
Yeah. And I undercharged for coaching because again, I also wasn't respecting the impact I was creating because I was looking at it as a side gig. So, I think initially I was charging like $400 a month. All right, two things are wrong with that. Month to month is not the right way to do it, right? And $400 is too low. So I made at some point, I just it sunk in, and I made an overnight change, and I went to a 1 year agreement because so it was a minimum. If you're going to work with me one to one, it was a minimum of a year at that time. I've since changed that too, and I'll explain it. But I just, there's in the path of personal development, in the path of change, it's not linear. People go up and down. So if you are coaching on one monthly basis, even a 3 month basis, you're giving people an easy out, which is exactly what they're going to hit that wall because again, they're not trusting that they're going to do what they need to do to get the results they want. So they're going to bail. Any opportunity they get, they're going to run from themselves. So if you can commit them to a period of time to get them through a full cycle of growth, and it's almost predictable. The most challenging part is usually about 3 months into coaching because you've probably covered a fair amount of growth tactics with them. And at about 3 months in, they're not getting results yet. They're getting pissed. They're like, okay, great. I invested all this money, spent all this time, and I'm not getting results. And I give it a name. I call it growth jet lag. I'm like, okay, I get it. It's the messy middle. It's the most frustrating time. But here's the thing. The universe hasn't caught up to you yet. What do you want to use with that, right? Universe or just the market? You've changed your website. You've gained a clearer brand identity. You've done all the right things. But there's an algorithm to this world and it has to catch up with you, and it hasn't caught up with you yet. I always say it's kind of like if you break somebody's trust, you can swear up and down you are from now on the most trustworthy person on the planet. But it's going to take a while for people to build that trust back up. So people are going to bail after 3 months because they've put in the work and aren't getting the results yet. So you have to stick with them through that cycle till they get on the other side of it and they start coming out of the messy middle. The messy middle is about 3 months. But I changed my model from 1 year to 6 months. Now, I will tell you, most of my clients stay with me for 10 months minimally. And then they often move on to other things, or they stay in my world in one way. But the reason I changed the presentation of my coaching work from 12 months to 6 months is that the psychology of the world is always evolving. And as you know, I'm sure people want better results quicker today. The idea that it could take 12 months to change their life or their business was just too long. When I changed it to 6 months, they were buying in easier. Like, okay, I'm willing to hold out for 6 months. Now, like I said, they end up staying with me for about 10 months, but at least after 6 months, it's on a month-to-month basis. But that's the only reason I changed from 1 year minimum to 6 month minimum for one-to-one coaching is because I wanted to help people feel like they could get the results quicker. And we get a lot, and I also felt like it jumpstart the process. It got us in action quicker. And then I leave it up to them if they want to hang on longer. But I think you have to stay as a coach or consultant. You have to stick with people through their messy middle in order to really give them the results they want.
And do you do this thing where when they initially come on boarding, what have you, setting expectations, and then do you like to share that there's this messy middle, or do you not like to put that out there so that they experience it? Maybe they wouldn't experience it. Do you like, how do you handle that?
That's a good question. I don't think I offer it because to me it's part of the process. It's more of a step at a time. So I don't think I put it out there. I think I probably have put out enough content on this topic via my podcast or other means that people that find their way in my world have probably heard me talk about that. I've had my podcast for 9 years, over 900 episodes. When I have conversations with prospective clients, it's often scary how much they know, right? Because I've delivered so much content over 9 years that they've heard so many of my philosophies. But of course, that's also why they align with me. So they probably have heard me talk about the messy middle and they're okay with it. I just, as you referenced in your introduction, that I just always refer to my style as in the trenches. Like, again, I've never had a traditional job, right? I only know how to talk about this stuff from real life, from the real life of figuring out. My goal now is to help, particularly through my Self-Employed Business Institute. Like, really what I want to do is collapse time. Because what I find, and I'll bet you find this too, I'm working with more people of what I like to say is of a certain age. Like, I don't work with 20-year-olds. I barely work with 30-year-olds. Most of my clients are like between 40 and 65, or, people are going into business at a later age. They're leaving corporate. They're starting like second and third chapters in their lives at 50, 55, and 60. So because of that, because they're people of a certain age, I find they want to get to where they want to go quicker. So I look at the work I do today, the coaching and the education and training I provide, particularly through the Business Institute. I often refer to as collapsing time. Like, I have figured out so much stuff over 40 years. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's not force you to sit back and figure out what's already been figured out. So as a coach, I'm not a real passive coach. I will share and tell you what I know. And I refer to my coaching style as pointing. I will point you. I never assume I'm right. But boy, do I have gut instincts that can guide me. And I will point you in that direction. Like, I think this might be your brand message, but now let's go investigate it. Let me point you in that direction and see where we go from there.
And do you have a style too of like asking questions and getting them to come up with things and getting them thinking creatively, using their imagination? Or is it more sharing what you know? Like, how do you approach that part?
It depends. And I love that you're asking that, because I can almost look at the format of my Business Institute. So we have 2 training calls a month, right? So the training is output, right? I refer to that as I'm training on what I have learned is in common in being self-employed, almost regardless of what industry you're in. Like, one of the things I teach is what's called a hug marketing system. So it's a very specific marketing system. It runs in common to almost any industry. It's applicable. I also teach something called the emotional journey, as far as particularly like the website mapping. Like, it's an emotional journey. How do you take people on an emotional journey? And I've had many people look at that and say, wow, that applies to anything. It could apply to the format of a podcast episode. It applies to writing. So I teach what is in common in order to collapse time and get people the information they need. And then everything I do also involves one-to-one coaching, because that's where it gets individualized. Not even personalized, but individualized to their needs. So I would say it's a blend that, I have a lot to say, and I have a lot of input. I have a lot to output, right? But the one-to-one coaching, when I can get somebody, right in front of me, then it's the questions, it's the digging. I rely heavily, and as a coach, I don't know where I often look at it like my hand is over my shoulder and somebody puts a tool in my hand. Like, okay, I don't even know where I say things come out of my mouth all the time that I've never said before.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I can
I don't know where it comes from. It just drops in, but that's the beauty of the coaching space, is what I call it. It's like, man, you get people together with a shared intention, whether it's 2 people or 20 people, you get people together with a shared intention and magic happens.
Masterminding. Yeah.
Right. So that's where I rely on I rely on the hair of my arms a lot. The hair of my arms stands up when something's in the room, in the space, that's truth. And I'll put that out there. I'm like, so it could be a question, but I rely so heavily on my instincts to say, hey, here's a hit. What if this is coming, what if this is true of you? What if this is the direction for you to go in? And I share that. And like I said, then allow them the opportunity to investigate it for themselves and prove it to be true or not.
Yeah, man, I love it. I feel the same way. Sometimes I'll watch content back that my team posts on Instagram or something, and I'm like, I don't remember saying that. It's just like, it's so wild how that works. So as we wrap this up, I want to know about podcasting and what podcasting has done for you personally, what it's done for your business. I know the power of it. I'm going to talk to you more later on about that one agency and what we've figured out. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, from you having a show and then also.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, the first thing I tell people nowadays is, there's a lot of value in being a touring guest, right? It's a lot less work than having your own show. So, and I actually teach people how to be an awesome podcast guest, because I've been on, my side of the mic as a host for 9 years, and 99.9% of the guests that come on my show are not helping themselves. Like, they're not actually using it strategically. I'm grateful for the magnificent content that they provide to my audience, but it's like, dude, you're not helping yourself. Like, you're not advancing. You don't have a lead magnet. Like, you're just giving people your website. Like, lead them somewhere that leads them to where you want them to go, where you can serve them. So 99.9% of guests are not prepared to really help themselves. So I teach people how to strategically do that. when I started in 2014, there was no long-term plan. I would never have thought I'd still be doing it 900 episodes and 9 years later. Like there was no long-term plan. It was honestly a personal challenge. That's why I started it, because I used to describe myself as a professional guest, because I was the guest in everybody else's home as a photographer, and I was a guest on everybody else's stage, and I'm the one that always had to ask where the bathroom was. And I started questioning whether I was successful because I opened up all the doors for myself, but was I interesting enough that people would come to me? I really started questioning my value at about 2014. Like, am I only where I am in life because I've knocked doors down? Like, if I just stood still, would people come to me? So podcasting to me was a way to find out if I could be attractive for people to come to me.
Create an attraction model.
Yeah. And I didn't have an attraction model because I was such an aggressive 20-year-old and 30-year-old, like pounding the pavement and knocking doors down. And you realize sometimes you beat success to the punch because you're afraid of the rejection or you're afraid of not getting. So I started looking at all that and said, well, so that's why I started my podcast. I wanted to start an attraction model to see what would happen. And it killed. Like, it was great. I couldn't believe the guests that were saying yes to me just based on the concept of the show. And, so what it has done for me is it changed everything. I mean, one way I noticed, I started noticing when people were introducing me at speaking gigs, they were now leading with Jeffrey Shaw as the host of, the photographer part kind of dropped away. And they were suddenly like, Jeffrey Shaw's the host of The Self-Employed Life. So that I definitely got a lot of clients from it because people listen to it. And often people listen to it for many, many years before they finally reach out and like, man, I've been listening to you for 5 years and I want to work with you now. So it definitely has been a funnel into business, and more than anything, the network I've developed of speakers and authors. I mean, I have a ridiculous network. Like it's crazy. The people I've got. I just signed a contract to convert my book, The Self-Employed Life, into a lit video book. I don't know if you've come across the lit video book yet. It's the new wave of books. We went from hardcover to paperback to audio, and now you're going to have video books. And what they do is they take the entire concept of a whole book and they create a small movie of it in 30 to 40 minutes. Incredibly well-produced movies with hired actors and the whole bit. It's incredible. Yeah. So I just signed a contract for my book to be turned into that. And the cool thing was that when I went into the library, they've now produced 40 of these video books. I knew almost every author because of my podcast. I'm like, and even when I met with the production team yesterday, they were like, you're friends with almost our entire library. I'm like, it's amazing. So that to me has been probably the biggest win in the podcast world. It's great to get clients from it, and it certainly has, but the relationships I've met, just outstanding.
Yeah, Jeffrey, you're right on with that, man. You sound like me. I talk about this all the time. You sound not about the book video part, because I like that idea and I need to know some more about that. So I'll be talking to you about that. Speaking of lead magnets, where can people reach you, engage with you further?
Yeah. I would offer a tool, particularly anybody watching this. Our topic today is self-employed. So go to selfemployedassessment.com. Selfemployedassessment.com. It is a custom algorithm. It's awesome. Like, this guy in Canada did an amazing job. Basically, it asks you 6 questions and it gives you a customized, individualized report on what I refer to your self-employed ecosystem, where in the ecosystem you're healthy and where you're in your ecosystem you're less healthy, right? Because the reality is, again, I'm someone who just takes personal responsibility for everything. And in the ecosystem of your business, everything needs to be harmonizing and working well. It's not in balance. Like, you don't spend equal amount of time in all parts of your ecosystem. But I'll tell you what, it's just like an ecosystem in nature. If one thing is off, it can kill the whole ecosystem. And if it's not going to kill your business, this I can guarantee. If something is off or multiple things are off in the ecosystem of your business, I guarantee you're working harder than you need to. And I can almost help anybody work easier if I can get in there and fix what's not healthy in their business. Guarantee that they can make more money with less effort.
Yeah, most of the time it's not working harder, folks. It's you don't know something. That's what it's all about.
100%. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey, listen, I love talking to you today, man. You're phenomenal. I really enjoyed the show. I wish we had more time. I ran over and I apologize because I appreciate people's time. I'm going to follow up with this with a quick 1 minute, 2 minute phone call. I want to tell you something, but I appreciate you being on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, guys, you've been watching the What Are You Made Of show here live on Fireside and the YouTube channel Mike C-Roc, Sirocco. If you're watching the replay, make sure you like, comment, subscribe to the